I went to a Dutch American symposium at New York Society for Ethical Culture on October 6-7, 2019. The symposium was called Humanism Across the Atlantic, Looking for Common Ground. At this symposium, Peter Derekx from Utrecht University in the Netherlands made a presentation on humanism and aging. In his presentation, he'll talk about the humanistic values of aging.
And so Peter Derkx is our first Dutch presenter. He studied English language and literature, philosophy, and history of humanism, and from 2003 to September 2016 as full professor of humanism and worldviews. And Peter, I think I met you in this room years ago. The former Humanist Institute, which is now the Center for Education, part of the American Humanist Association, often met here. And I know for a time we were hoping that we could get an exchange program going. And it just didn't work out for lack of funds. But you know, lo and behold, we were patient and you got the funds. And so now you're here. And it's just a wonderful, I'm just so delighted that you're here speaking at the New York Society. And we're all looking forward to your presentation on humanism and aging. Thank you.
I must be quite arrogant because I want to tell you quite a lot about humanism and aging. I have so many slides. I hope I make it in time, so I'll start immediately. First part is about aging. What are we talking about? Aging for individuals has changed quite a lot. Average world life expectancy at birth. In 1800, people could expect on average to live about 30 years. In 2017, life expectancy for men, all on average, globally, over all the world, is 70 years, and for women it's 75, and that's enormous improvement. And you can see it from another figure, the most common age at death. That's when do most people die? In 1925 in France, it was an age below 5. It's a lot to do with infant mortality. In 1980 in France, it was 80 years for men. I hope you understand what it means. At what age do most people die? So how many people die when they're 78? How many people die when they're 79? And how many people die when they're 20? Most people die in the year when they're 80. That's, again, in 1980, that's an enormous improvement compared with 25. And it goes on. In 2013, most men died when they were 86, and most women died when they were 91. So this incredible improvement. On a population level, it's another increase you can see. In 2013, there were 840 million people in the world over 60. The prediction is that in 2050 there will be more than 2 billion people over 60, of whom 80% live in less developed regions of the world. And this population aging is, well, most discussion is about the old age dependency ratio. That means the number of pensioners in relation to the number of people at working age. For instance, in Germany, in 1956, there were about 16 pensioners for every 100 people at working age. In 2006, it was 29 pensioners for every 100 workers. And in 2056, the prediction is there will be 60 pensioners for every 100 people working. And here is an enormous amount of discussion about it. It's all about money. Aging and health, that's another important aspect. Mortality, life expectancy, the figures we saw, it's all about mortality and about the age of death. Morbidity is about disease. How is people's health? How many diseases do they get at what time, etc. And disability is something different again. That's about people might be ill, but can they still function normally in society, or is that impossible? Government policies at the moment are all about compression of morbidity. They're trying to bring down the number of diseases and the years of disease. Those policies are not successful because people, when they get older, they get more diseases. I remember a few years ago, the age at which people on average get their first age-associated disease was 54. At 54, people on average get their first age-associated disease. And this might move up a bit, but compression of morbidity ideally means that people are healthy till 2 years before they die. And then they have a short period going down, and then they die. That's not what happens. People get age-associated diseases, chronic diseases, and they have them for a long time before they die. What does happen in some countries and in some areas, and what does seem possible, is compression of disability. People get chronic diseases, but they learn to live with it. They adapt, they get instruments, machines, they get pills, they get all social adaptations, better transportation, all kinds of services. So what seems possible is compression of disability. There's a whole lot of talk about the third age and the fourth age. I remember talking to Paul Baltus, a very famous psychologist of aging, and he said the third age, between 60 and 80, it goes much better than we expected. People have a great time, the young, old. But he also said the fourth age is worse than we knew. Over 80, over 85, people get terrible situations, and it's much worse than we thought. And he was very much afraid about the future, what will go on. People might be able to live much longer, but he was afraid they would have decades of terrible diseases before they would die. Recent research has shown that fourth age is not that bad. But why is that? It's because the people over 80 who are in worse shape, they die first. So when you look at the age of 85, about 30 to 40% of those people are quite able to function without any problem. And when you look at people at the age of 92 and people at the age of 100, the percentage is the same, because the people in worse shape die first. There are three discourses about aging. The one is financial, I already said something about this. The other one is medical. There's a lot of talk too about health, aging healthily, and at some situations, some points, you get the impression that aging well is the same as aging in good health. And that's not what I will be talking about. I will not be talking too much about the money. I will not be talking too much about health. I will be talking about aging existentially, about the experience of a meaningful life for older persons. Because I also think that that's where humanism can have something fundamental to add to the discussions. There is too little discussion about aging in an existential way. The core of humanism, that's my second part. I'll keep it very short because else I won't be able to say anything about the rest. And I take it that most people know something about it here. For me, after having studied humanism for decades, this is my conclusion. The core of humanism is 4 distinctive features. Every worldview or meaning frame or thinking about life is a human product that originated in a specific culture and context. I think this is much more fundamental than believing in God or not. I think when people have ideas about God or about living as a human being or about the world, it's much more fundamental to realize that all those thoughts are human products from a specific culture. Second defining characteristic of humanism for me is that all human beings as citizens ought to regard and treat each other as valuable equals. It relates to human dignity, human rights, etc. Third issue is that human beings should use their freedom and agency to develop themselves and to consciously shape their lives. When people just live and don't care about how, and that's not the humanist attitude. Humanists want to live consciously and to make something out of it, something valuable. And the last defining characteristic for me is that the highest goal of human action and behavior should be the love of specific, vulnerable, unique, and irreplaceable persons. And in the rest of my talk, I will take these 4 characteristics and relate them to aging and tell more about them. First, every thought is a human product. I know from my own experience, for instance, my grandmother, that the idea of what God does is done well, it's a human belief, has been a consolation for many, many people. For instance, for parents who lost infants to infectious diseases for which no cures existed. My grandmother lost 4 of her 5 children, and this was how she consoled herself. It has to do with every thought about life as a human product. My grandmother didn't think so. She really thought that what God does is done well, and she believed in a supernatural God, and she didn't think this was a human thought of herself. But I think humanists interpret these things like it's all a human product. But such a human product can be very functional. I think that as aging is concerned, for religious people the main temptation might be to see all age-associated losses as inevitable and to be accepted. Something like, it's my age, I can't do anything about it, and that's the way the world turns. For humanists, the main temptation might be to see all age-associated limitations, even aging itself included, as problems that can be solved, given time, money, and determination to do it. I think both positions are wrong, and it's always a matter in between somewhere. For instance, the children that my grandmother's children died from whooping cough, nothing could be done about that in 1917-18. But now we can do something about that. So it's also historically relative. I think in relation to aging, naturalization might be one of the main important things. Naturalization is incorrectly presenting situations and developments as natural givens that can't be changed by human effort or intervention. Crucial example is, and that's what I will be talking about more, the 3 boxes of life. Like a life naturally can be divided into a period of education, that's the beginning of life, a period of work and child rearing, that's the long middle, and a period of retirement. And that's the stage sequence of a natural life course. That's how it's presented, and that's how many, many people still think it is. And I think even discussions and debates by highly learned people at the moment still accept this as the natural way of living. The work child rearing period also supposes a difference between men and women having different tasks. But Laura Carstensen, professor of psychology at Stanford University, recently said in an interview, for people smack in a midlife rush of managing full-time careers, dependent children, and aging parents, nothing feels so short in supply as time. Stopping work abruptly at 66 isn't practical financially for a growing number of seniors. And given the sudden loss of status, social interaction, and purpose that can follow retirement, it's often not a psychologically healthy move either. So she suggests to solve this, and she suggests that adults should not work full-time before they are 40, and that they should go on longer. She says the period in the middle is too full with too many different tasks, people get crazy. So we have to do something about this. I think something different. Humanists feel that humans ought to develop themselves and should try to create something beautiful out of their lives as a whole. I think of the Renaissance humanists with their idea of the uomo universale. I think humans should try to realize all 4 dimensions a life ideally has: learning, caring, working, and enjoying yourself, to an acceptable extent during the whole of their lives. So, not full-time learning from 0 to 20, caring from 20 to 40. It's a bit what Laura Carstensen says. Working from 40 to 70. And then enjoying or basically doing nothing from 70 onwards. I think it would be much better to have a life course like something like, doesn't have to be exactly like this, but something like from 15 to 25 years of age, a paid job of on average 10 or 15 hours a week. From 25 to 70, a job of on average 25 hours. And from 70 to 85, a job of 10 or 15 hours again. I think that would be much better for the large majority of people. And a socially and politically legitimated working life, more or less resembling this, gives people, women and men, during their whole life enough time and freedom for learning, caring, as well as enjoying. And you would also solve another problem. I meet many people who are around 60, about 60, and they say, I hope I make my retirement. I hope I don't die before I get the period where I can enjoy myself. That's a ridiculous way of organizing a life course. People should be able to enjoy themselves, care for the loved ones before retirement. The next characteristic of humanism, treatment of all people as equals. I think it's a very important issue of humanism. And Michael Marmot, the director of the Institute of Health Equity at University College London, he says, travel from the southeast of downtown Washington to Montgomery County, Maryland. For each mile traveled, life expectancy rises about a year and a half. There's a 20-year gap between poor blacks at one end of the journey, male life expectancy at birth is 57, and rich whites at the other. So who on average live 20 years longer? And Michael Marmot says social status correlates with life expectancy all over the world. He even calls it the status syndrome. In the rather egalitarian Netherlands, where the difference in life expectancy between those two groups is only 7 years compared to Washington 20 years, the group with the lowest household income was compared with the group with the highest income. And they found that over the years 2011-2014, members of the poorest group on average started to experience age-associated diseases 18 years before the members of the richest group. So it points to inequalities in healthy life expectancy, and those inequalities are even much larger than the inequalities in life expectancy. And it's not about absolute poverty. Blacks in the United States have about 4 times the income of men in Costa Rica or Cuba, but about 9 years shorter life expectancy. The shorter life expectancy has little to do with absolute income. It has much more to do with lack of control and social participation. It's about being deprived of a clean, safe neighborhood, meaningful work, opportunities for quality children's education, freedom from police harassment and arrest, and freedom from violence and aggression. How to reduce socially determined inequalities in health and mortality. There's a whole intellectual industry about this. There are libraries about this, but experts agree that the best means is not to be found in advancing and enhancing biomedical research and healthcare, but in reducing the underlying inequalities in income and wealth. Marmot proposes 2 strategies: improve the minimum conditions in which people are born, grow, live, work and age, in accordance with the human rights approach, and tackle gross inequalities in the distribution of power, money and resources. In this area there's a lot to be done. The wealth of the world's billionaires increased by $900 billion in 2018 alone, or 2.5 billion a day. Meanwhile, the wealth of the poorest half of humanity, 3.8 billion people, fell by 11%. Well, you can read figures like this all the time, but I want to give it once again because it's shocking to me every time I read them. Wealth is particularly undertaxed. In 2015, only 4 cents in every dollar of tax revenue came from taxes on wealth. And in rich countries, the average top rate of personal income tax fell from 62% in 1970, and then Reagan and Thatcher came, to 38% in 2013. In developing countries, the average top rate of personal income tax is even lower. One last remark on this. In a society in which it can reliably be predicted that persons with low education, persons with low income, and persons of certain occupations will on average suffer from diachronic diseases and even die many years earlier than others. It's a crazy idea to have the same retirement age and regulations for everyone. The other characteristic, self-realization, that's an important issue for humanists. Alan Geworth, professor of philosophy at Chicago, defines self-realization as carrying to fruition one's deepest desires or one's worthiest capacities. It's a bringing of oneself to flourishing completion, an unfolding of what is strongest or best in oneself, so that it represents the successful culmination of one's aspirations or potentialities. The individual agent has the freedom to pursue a large variety of aspirations, as long as their striving for self-realization respects basic moral principles such as not seriously harming others. So the humanist prescription is not that one ought to develop oneself in a particular way, because that's personal freedom, but you should develop yourself in one way, one way or other, and you choose it yourself. But you should not just life happen to you, but you should try to take some personal control over it. Nevertheless, as indicated before, I think it's better to have a certain balance between learning, caring, working, and enjoying. I think it's not good for people to only work from 25 to 70. And I don't think it's good for people to only care for others from 20 to 75 or something like that. I feel it's better for people to have a certain balance between those things. In principle, a humanist view of aging well presupposes that people can work on their self-realization throughout the entire life course, although aspirations, purposes, and capacities can differ in different phases of life. Regrettably, we have two dominant ageist cultural narratives about later life, and they neglect or even deny the possibility of self-realization for elderly people. One you could call decline narratives, and the other you could call age-defying narratives. Decline narratives equate aging with a gradual and inescapable process of decline, representing deterioration in physical, mental, and social domains. And old people are set apart as members of a non-attractive social category. Age-defying narratives communicate the message that we can age well, as long as we remain young. But that message makes the ageist claim that only youth-related frameworks revolving around productivity, activity, fitness, and health can guide us towards a flourishing life. Hanne Lacaille, a colleague of mine, proposes that humanists would do well to embrace what she calls narratives of becoming, expressing the underlying assumption of the humanist focus on self-realization, namely that human beings should engage in a continuous process of becoming who they are, meaning discovering and creating their identity in order to optimally fulfill the potentials of their humanity. Narratives of becoming offer us two fundamental insights about later life. Older people are fully fledged moral agents who are able to engage purposefully in processes of self-development. And the other insight, older people are part of a general interhuman condition characterized by existential vulnerability and finitude. But in their process of self-realization, the old people can develop attitudes and virtues to relate to this reality in an inspiring, courageous, and comforting manner. But it's important that here it's a general interhuman condition. Young people can also die. They're also vulnerable and finite. But old people statistically have more, well, I don't know how to say, more risk of dying, etc. Lars Tornstam, a Swedish gerontologist, has a concept of gerotranscendence, and it points to the positive potential of growing older. He says, older people experience a sense of being part of a larger cycle of generations and a high acceptance of what remains unknown and uncontrollable in life. Older people recognize shadow sides in their personality, seeing coherence in their life trajectory, recognizing acceptance of what can't be undone. And they also have a deepening of and being more selective in relationships and more able to resist following social conventions. All people want to enjoy the relationships they have. They're not trying to get to know new people all the time. And Tornstam says this is really gero-transcendence. He says it's specific for old people. I think I don't agree with this. I think young people can also do this. And it also depends very much on culture and what you have learned and on attitude. But you might statistically find it more in older people than in young people, but even that is very doubtful. I know some studies, surveys in which it doesn't, it's not something especially for older people, but it points to something that's valuable and valuable for old and young people. This is Hanne Lacaille and her book in which she writes a lot about aging and self-realization. It's a great book and you can download it free as a PDF. So it's her PhD. Then my final part is about love. Remember, I say a very important defining characteristic of humanism is that in the end, what is most important is loving specific, vulnerable, irreplaceable individuals. And that's the idea that for each one of us, there are some people, they might not be very important for others, but for us, they're all important. And they're the people we love. It's the people They might be our parents, our children, our friends, but there are some people we love, and that's the most important thing in life. I think that's part of humanism. I take this from Tsvetan Todorov. It's a Bulgarian-French literary scientist, philosopher. He wrote a beautiful book, Imperfect Garden, The Legacy of Humanism. It's a debate about French culture, French humanism, but it's very valuable for humanists all over the world. He distinguishes between three relational spheres. The humanitarian sphere, I must help a person in danger, whoever it is. He distinguishes that from the political sphere. In some respects, all my fellow citizens are interchangeable, but they're not interchangeable with foreigners. And then the third sphere is the personal sphere, in which no substitution is possible. I'm attached to my father, to my lover, to my friend, to my child, as irreplaceable individuals. And if they, for some reason, disappear, you can get new friends, you can get a new partner, etc. But they don't replace the other people. That's Tsvetan Todorov. I found out this morning that he died in 2017. I didn't know. An important part of his idea is, in the humanist view, what ultimately counts for most human beings is the life and experience of other human individuals, and not the growth, efficiency, or progress of an abstraction, such as the economy, our nation, or even humanity. If we sacrifice singular human beings for the good of humanity, we have left humanism behind. And the same is true if we subject our entire existence to what should be only its means: work, money, success. Love escapes these reductions. So what is this love? Robert Sternberg made a famous distinction between three main components of love: intimacy, passion, and decision commitment. And intimacy is about the feelings of closeness, connectedness, bondedness one experiences in loving relationships. Passion is about drives that lead to romance, physical attraction, and sexual consummation. And decision commitment encompasses, in the short term, the decision that one loves another, and in the long term, the commitment to maintain that love. Companionate love, according to Todorov, is the most important defining characteristic of humanism. Intimacy, passion, and commitment don't exclude each other, but different combinations and amounts of them result in different types of love. And companionate love places intimacy and commitment at the center. And it's a defining characteristic of humanism, according to him, because he compares it with Christianity. Christianity also places a lot of emphasis on loving other people, but it's a derivative love. It's derivative from loving God, and you love God through loving other people. Love might look like something very personal and intimate, and how can society have anything to do with this? Many people have shown that there are a lot of social conditions that are important for love. This substantial increase in life expectancy, which I have shown at the beginning, has a lot of consequences for personal love relationships. In the past, partners could hardly expect to spend many years together while being old. That has changed. And in late modern society, people are less able to fall back on given bonds such as family or neighbors. That's because of social mobility and getting jobs somewhere else and moving. The significance of friends has increased. That's different from past societies. A study comparing 25 European countries has shown that average income and social welfare policies for those in need are crucial conditions for the number of lonely people in a country. When there are bad social welfare policies and when average income is low, there will be more lonely people in a country. So there are social conditions for these very private experiences. Loneliness in older people. It's often said that loneliness is a thing of old people. When you look at research, it turns out to be more complicated. Research in Europe and North America has shown that loneliness between the ages of 45 and 80 is lower than between the ages of 15 and 24 and over the age of 80. Loneliness is common among the young and the very old. And note that 55% of the people over 70 are not lonely. So it's also ridiculous to do as every old person is lonely. That's not the case. Anja Magielsen, a small picture, but you will see her tomorrow here presenting. She has shown that especially in late modern society, certain personal competencies are very helpful, if not necessary, for developing and maintaining a satisfactory social network. So for not being lonely, you need certain competencies, like keeping sufficient self-respect, ability to overcome feelings of fear, guilt and shame, daring to show one's vulnerability, ability to take the initiative, and to search for alternatives if the situation is not satisfactory. The development of competencies continues during a person's entire life course, but it seems likely that the possibility to escape loneliness and to experience connectedness and companionate love in old age, in many cases depends on having had a good enough youth and having learned certain competencies while being young. Individuals who are more socially connected, and you can measure that in many different ways, have better health and have 50% better chances of survival across a follow-up period compared to those people less socially connected. And I found a very striking example of this in an article by a Swedish researcher. Quote, "The risk associated with lacking social connectedness, so the risk of loneliness, is equivalent to smoking up to 15 cigarettes per day and is greater than alcohol abuse, physical inactivity, obesity and air pollution. But health is not everything. In a study of people over the age of 85 in the Netherlands, it turned out that the very old regard social contacts as much more important than physical and cognitive health. Those very old people see health and health adaptations as a condition for having a social life. And health in itself doesn't interest them. Often because they have many chronic diseases and they couldn't care less as long as they see their friends and family, etc. And the following case from the same study attests to the importance of love, not just of positive social relationships. It's a quote again from the study. It's about a couple in the Netherlands. Klaas and Vera Philipsen, it's not their real names, are well-to-do, live in a beautiful house with a garden, and have many social contacts. Their ability to stay in control and to adjust to old age is well illustrated in their decision to adopt a young dog. When the anthropologist asked Miss Philipsen whether she regarded herself as successful in her life, she said she was not. Years ago, there had been a conflict between her husband and her daughter. At the time, she chose her husband's side, and since that incident, the daughter has severed all contacts with them. The fact that she has lost all contact with her daughter gives her a continuing feeling of loss. All her successes in life are overshadowed by this failure. So that's the end of my talk, in which I gave you a lot of things to think about humanism and aging. And if you want to know more about it, we have a full article about this, and you can see. It will be published in the Oxford Handbook of Humanism, edited by Anthony Pym. I don't know when it will be published, because it's a big book with many contributors, so it might even be years before it will be published. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. I have the wireless mic, but I want to start off with a question. I've seen online a number of articles. It keeps popping up, and maybe because of the cookies I have in there, that knows that I'd be interested. And maybe others have seen as well that in the Netherlands you have a project that connects older people with some form of dementia with younger adults living together and sort of in a kind of a commune. I'm assuming you're familiar with that, and how does that work? And is this something, I keep looking at this, and of course everyone looks very happy. There are young people, I'd say in their 20s, and then older people, I'm guessing in their 80s to 90s, in relationship, loving each other, living together. So if you knew something about that, I'd love to hear more about it. And why do you think that the Dutch are able to do that so well, and maybe other countries like ours are kind of slow to come to that? Because I know our members, those of them who live in so-called assisted living, are segregated in age cohorts and don't have that kind of relationship.
I can't say very much about the differences between the Netherlands and other countries in this respect. I should have to say that in the Netherlands these are exceptions as well. These are new developments that people are talking about a lot because they are exceptions. I know about one of these projects. I saw a film about it. Our whole group saw a film about it, and it was about students getting a room in an elderly home, and they didn't have to pay rent or only very little rent, on condition that they would be friendly to the older persons and take care of them a bit. And so it wasn't just being friendly, but it was also because the young they got something for it.
Economic incentive.
Yeah. And there were many relationships, more than normally, between those young people and the older persons. But I got the impression that the relationships, but I don't really know very much about it. I only saw this film, but I got the impression that the relationships that developed were more or less stereotypical between young and old person. And I can't really judge whether they were really personal friendship relationships. Yeah.
So first, Peter, thank you very much. That was a lovely talk, and I think it's inspiring and informative both. Now, the natural thing to say after hearing that talk is, well, we've got to do lots of things, especially in this country, perhaps not so much in the Netherlands, to change the structure of the wealth in society. Income inequality is terrible, and one might look at the kinds of proposals that the late Sir Anthony Atkinson made in a lovely book, Inequality, about doing something like that. But I want to focus somewhere different, which connects some of the things in your self-realization.
Could you speak a bit louder, because
I want to say something a little bit different, because I think it's not just remedying inequalities in wealth. A lot of social transformation is actually needed if one takes the points that you've made seriously. I'm going to focus on education. So if we go back to the point that Gewirth starts from, the idea of realizing yourself in terms of fulfilling your desires, we should also ask, where do those desires for yourself actually come from? And of course, they're formed relatively early in interactions between young individuals in society largely through educational processes. Of course, educational processes of a broad kind, what they receive from the family, from the neighborhood, and what they receive through the schools. And it's tempting then to fall into the trap of thinking that what we've got to do is invest very strongly in that. And that's probably a necessary condition, but it isn't sufficient for the reasons that you gave, right? that we don't arrive at a moment, say in late adolescence or in early adulthood, where we say, oh, this is who I am, and now these are my desires, and now I want to go on from here. There's no great moment of Joycean epiphany when you just sort of decide who you want to be and how you fulfill yourself. So that's why I think I haven't read Hannah Lecoeur's book, but her idea of a continuous development is so important. But what that means is not only that the box model has to go in the ways that you suggested, but also there have to be opportunities for self-discovery and further education throughout people's lives and extending into old age. And then when I come back at the end to Anya's point about the need for fostering the skills, the competencies for forming and maintaining relationships, if that's to be done in our youth, then that has to be focal to the kinds of educational ventures that we develop. So I think Atkinson's right. We need a reorganization of the economic structures of societies. But there are also these other institutions which need to be fundamentally rethought in light of the kinds of points that you've made, which are, I think, really the essence of humanism. So thank you very much.
Yeah. I just want to remark that I wholeheartedly agree with everything you've said, and I think that the Atkinson report to the Blair government in the UK, the main point of that report was that if you want to prevent poor, low-educated people from dying much earlier than all the others, you don't invest in health research and things like that, because health research first profits the rich and healthy already. No, you have to invest in redistributing income, wealth. But he also said education, housing, etc. He mentioned 18 policy measures not related to health to make sure that poor people don't die much earlier than But thank you very much.
As listening to you, I felt you made kind of an artificial distinction between the phases of life of working or producing things and enjoying. It seems to me that those can often be the same. Indeed, I had a friend who had a little poster above his door that said, the only two people that never have to go to work are baseball players and physicists. And that's not quite exactly true, but it does make a point that designing work in a way that it satisfies is something that's very real to everyone. And it seems to me, in terms of thinking about your idea about aging, one of the things you might consider is how can you provide a satisfaction in life, something that's really enjoyment for people after they retire. Your statement about hitting 66 and all the things you lose. I agree that that's really unfortunate, and the question is, can you find a project for people or design a project for people in society so that they are happy? And I wonder if you think more in terms of the humanist value of defining work in a way that's useful or helpful for people.
I think you raise important issues, and I've thought a lot about it, but when you give a talk, in order to be understandable, you have to limit yourself. And I agree very much with you. When people work, they can also enjoy themselves. And there's a lot of literature about this. Some people, there's a researcher with an unpronounceable name, something like Brzezinski. She wrote important articles about distinctions between a job, a career, and a calling. And it's very interesting literature. But at the same time, it's very clear that even for me, as a professor of humanism, enjoying my work very much for decades, I really enjoyed my job. I had many moments when my wife said to me, "Shall we go and have a bike ride in nature?" And I would have loved to, but I was too busy with my job, career, or calling. And I think, although you're right in many aspects of what you say, I think it's still useful to make these distinctions. And then it's useful for a debate in society about how to organize our life course. And I think the present way of organizing it is not the best one. And I think the proposal of Laura Carstensen for start working full-time later and working longer, etc., that's not the kind of radical change we need.